Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling, well, a really complex and honestly quite polarizing topic, unauthorized immigration in the U.S.
It certainly is, and it's one where the headlines rarely capture the full picture.
Exactly. So for you listening, we've gone through a lot of material, economic reports, policy papers, demographic data. Our goal here isn't to push any agenda.
No, right.
It's really just to cut through some of that noise and give you a balanced, fact-based look at the scope, the impacts, the difficult choices involved. We're focusing on the data and the trade-offs.
And maybe the first step, really, is getting clear on who we're actually talking about.
Mhm.
The term unauthorized immigrant, it covers more ground than people often think.
Right. It's not just about border crossings, is it?
Not by a long shot. Yes, it includes people who cross without permission.
Yeah.
But a very significant group, often overlooked, are people who entered legally but then overstayed their visas.
Visa overstays. Okay, that's a huge piece of the puzzle right there. Changes the conversation a bit.
It really does. And there's a third group we absolutely have to include. Asylum seekers. These are
Mhm.
individuals who are, legally present in the U.S. while their cases are pending,
But the system is so backed up.
massively.
Right.
So they end up in this kind of legal limbo, sometimes for years.
Hmm.
When you add all three groups together, the border crossers, the visa overstayers, and those in the asylum backlog, the estimates land somewhere around 11 to 14 million people currently in the U.S.
11 to 14 million. Wow. That number itself is staggering. So
yeah.
where are people coming from, and has that changed? Because the story used to be primarily about Mexico, right?
It did. For a long time, that was the dominant flow. And actually, from the mid-2000s up until about 2020, the overall number of unauthorized residents was pretty stable, maybe even dipped slightly.
Okay.
But then things shifted dramatically.
Mm.
Around 2021, 2022, 2023, we saw these really significant surges in border encounters, and the overall inflow picked up pace again.
And that recent surge brought a different mix of people.
Absolutely. It's much more diverse now. While migration from Mexico is still a factor, we're seeing much larger shares from Central America, think Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador,
Right.
but also increasingly people from South America, Venezuela, for instance, and even significant numbers from parts of Asia and Africa. It's a global phenomenon now.
And this diversification really points to the drivers, the push factors, right? What makes someone leave home?
Exactly. We often hear about the known factors: violence, political instability, maybe escaping persecution, deep-seated poverty. Those are definitely still major drivers.
Sure.
But our sources also point to something else emerging, maybe less documented until recently.
Which is?
Natural disasters and the effects of climate change. Think about major hurricanes, prolonged droughts, destroying agriculture.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wipes out livelihoods.
Completely. When your farm is gone or your village is flooded, migration stops being just an economic calculation. It becomes about survival. So that's adding another layer on top of the existing poverty and instability issues.
So those are the powerful forces pushing people out. What about the pull factors drawing them specifically to the U.S.?
Well, the number one pull is still the perception of economic opportunity. Even if it's low-wage work or in the informal economy, it's often seen as better than the alternative back home.
Okay, jobs. What else?
A really critical, maybe underestimated factor is existing migrant networks. Having family or friends already settled here is huge.
How so?
It provides a lifeline, help with money for the journey, a place to stay initially, leads on finding work. It makes an incredibly difficult, dangerous journey seem feasible.
And then there's the policy aspect itself, or maybe the lack of effective policy.
That's a crucial point. The limited legal pathways for many potential migrants, combined with these enormous visa backlogs, it essentially funnels people towards irregular routes.
So if you can't get in line legally, or the line takes decades,
Then crossing without authorization or overstaying a temporary visa might feel like the only viable option. The system itself, in its current state, inadvertently contributes to the problem it's trying to solve.
which is a perfect transition, really, into the impacts here in the U.S., because the data shows it's definitely a double-edged sword, right? There are economic benefits, but also real strains.
Absolutely. It's far too simplistic to paint it as all good or all bad. Let's maybe start with the positive economic contributions.
Okay. Where do we see that most clearly?
Labor. Unauthorized immigrants are filling some really critical roles, often in tough industries where employers struggle to find enough native-born workers. Think agriculture, picking crops, food processing, construction, hospitality.
So they're keeping those sectors going, essentially.
In many cases, yes. They help keep those industries competitive And then there's the tax question.
Ah, yes, the common argument that they don't pay taxes. What did the sources say?
Well, the sources flatly contradict that myth. Unauthorized immigrants collectively pay billions in taxes every year
Billions? How?
through multiple channels. Sales taxes, obviously, whenever they buy
Yeah.
goods, property taxes, often indirectly through their rent, and many actually pay income taxes too.
Even without Social Security numbers.
Yes, using what's called an individual taxpayer identification number, or ITA. They file taxes, contribute to Social Security and Medicare funds.
But they generally can't claim those benefits later on.
Exactly. So, particularly at the federal level, they can represent a net fiscal positive in that regard. They also help bolster the labor force as the U.S. population ages, kind of a demographic relief valve.
Okay, so billions in taxes filling key jobs. Why then do we constantly hear about the strain on public services, particularly in border towns or places with high concentrations? Seems contradictory.
It feels contradictory, but it comes down to how funding works. It's about jurisdiction. Those income taxes often go to the federal government, sales taxes to the state or locality.
Right.
But the immediate costs for schools dealing with more kids, maybe needing ESL teachers or emergency rooms providing uncompensated care, local law enforcement, those costs hit local and county budgets hard.
Which are often funded mainly by property taxes.
Precisely. So you have this mismatch. Contributions flowing one way, often federally, but the costs are very concentrated locally. And the federal government often doesn't adequately reimburse those local areas for the increased burden.
That explains the tension. So national benefit, local strain.
That's a good way to put it. And beyond the budget pressure, the other major negative impact is just the system overload. We touched on it earlier, the immigration courts, the asylum system. They are completely swamped.
Leading to those multi-year waits.
Years and years.
Yeah.
Which means millions living in this prolonged state of uncertainty. It's inefficient, it's costly, and it's frankly a humanitarian issue too.
And what about the impact on wages for, say, low-skilled American workers? That's always a big debate.
It is, and the economic research is, well, contested. Most studies suggest the overall national impact on wages for native-born workers is pretty small, maybe negligible. But some research does suggest there might be downward pressure on wages for a specific, narrow group, legal workers with very low skill levels, particularly those without a high school diploma. And that effect seems localized, mainly in sectors where unauthorized workers are concentrated.
So not a widespread effect, but potentially real for a specific segment.
That seems to be the most nuanced read of the data.
Okay, that really sets the stage for our final segment, the policy maze. The system's overloaded, the impacts are mixed, the politics are, well, intense.
And unstable. That's maybe the biggest takeaway from the policy analysis in the sources. The constant swinging back and forth between administrations makes any kind of stable, long-term reform incredibly difficult.
We have the basic laws, like the Immigration and Nationality Act,
Right.
and then these temporary fixes.
Right. Things like DACA deferred action for childhood arrivals, protecting those brought here as kids, or TPS, temporary protected status for people from countries hit by disaster or conflict. But even those are constantly challenged in court. There's no permanence.
So let's break down the main policy options the sources discuss. What are the big levers people talk about pulling, and what are the trade-offs? Maybe start with a path to legalization for those already here.
Okay, that's often framed as the most pragmatic economic approach. The pros are pretty clear. You bring millions of people out of the shadows onto the tax rolls officially. You reduce worker exploitation because they have legal rights, better integration.
Seems logical. What's the con?
The political argument is that it's seen as rewarding breaking the law. The fear is that it might encourage more unauthorized immigration down the line. That perception creates huge political resistance.
Making it very hard to pass. Okay. Option 2. Focus on the front door, expanded legal pathways.
This tackles the issue from the other end, creating more visas, maybe better guest worker programs. The pro is it directly addresses the labor demand we talked about.
Right.
If people have a viable legal way to come, they have less incentive to cross illegally. It gives the government more control over who comes and fills needed jobs.
Makes sense. The downside.
It needs really careful design and oversight. You have to make sure these programs don't undercut wages or working conditions for existing workers, legal immigrants, or native-born. Regulation is key, and that's complex.
Okay. Third path. The one we hear about most often, stricter border enforcement. Walls, technology, more agents.
The intended pro is obvious. Deter and reduce illegal crossings, gain more operational control over the border, and enhanced enforcement can achieve some reduction in certain types of crossings.
But the trade-offs.
They're significant. First, cost. It's incredibly expensive. Second, it doesn't eliminate the push factors. Desperate people tend to find other ways, often taking much more dangerous routes through remote areas.
Leading to more deaths and humanitarian issues.
Exactly. And there are civil liberties concerns too, depending on the methods used.
All right, final policy area. Asylum and refugee system reform. Dealing with that backlog.
This is about making the existing system work better, faster, streamlining the process, hiring more judges and asylum officers. The pro is quicker decisions.
So people who qualify get protection sooner, and those who don't aren't left in limbo for years.
That's the goal. Faster resolution reduces the incentive to just stay and wait indefinitely.
Right.
The con, it requires a huge investment of resources, and there's a real risk that if you prioritize speed too much, you might cut corners, potentially denying valid claims for protection. It's a delicate balance.
So looking at all four: legalization, legal pathways, enforcement, asylum reform, it feels like none is a magic bullet. What's the overall consensus, if any, from the experts cited in our sources?
The overwhelming agreement is on two things. First, the status quo is unsustainable. It's costly, inefficient, creates legal chaos, and involves real human suffering. Doing nothing isn't really an option.
And second,
Balanced reform is necessary. Experts generally argue that you can't just pick one approach. Effective, humane enforcement probably needs to be combined with realistic pathways for those already contributing and significant improvements to the legal immigration system to make it function properly.
so they're interconnected. Trying to just do enforcement, for example, without addressing the other pieces.
Just continues the cycle we're in. It doesn't solve the underlying problems.
That leads us to our final thought, something that often gets lost in the policy debates.
The human dimension, the ethics of it all.
Yeah.
Because regardless of your stance on policy specifics, the reality highlighted in the sources is that being unauthorized makes people incredibly vulnerable. Vulnerable to exploitation by employers, to dangerously low pay, to unsafe working conditions. They often fear reporting abuses because of their status.
So the real challenge cuts deeper than just policy choices.
I think so. The ultimate question for society, running underneath all these policy debates, is how do we balance the legitimate goal of enforcing immigration law with the fundamental need to ensure basic human rights and protections, things like due process, safety, keeping families together for everyone within our borders, regardless of their legal status.
That tension between enforcement and fundamental human rights?
It's at the core of it. And finding a way to navigate that tension is perhaps the hardest part of achieving any kind of durable, just reform.
A really profound point to end on. Hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has illuminated the sheer complexity, the difficult trade-offs involved. It's definitely not simple. Thanks for joining us.